Christmas is the what? As the song says. Christmas is the most wonderful time of the year, right? Christmas is the most wonderful time of the year. It's a joyous time. And it's hard to get away from people without somebody saying Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays. We'll even throw in maybe a season's greetings. I've heard that once, probably in the last couple of years, that somebody actually said season. I just thought that was just a thing for, signs or something like that. But somebody actually said season's greetings. And I was like, thank you. I didn't know what to do with that. But Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, season greetings. These are things that you can't really get very far without somebody saying. But what about, we say those things, right? We say to each other, Happy Thanksgiving, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. What about to those who don't find anything to be merry, to be happy? Their lives, to their thinking, to their emotions, to their heart, their lives seem like there really isn't anything to be happy about. No motivation to be merry, no reason to be happy. And so to say something like Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays, they may accept that because they don't want to be rude, but in their hearts they want to say, shut up, right? It's almost like what Solomon said in Proverbs 25:20. He says, whoever sings songs to a heavy heart is like one who takes off a garment on a cold day, and like vinegar on soda. I think I've also read it as vinegar on teeth, which isn't pleasant either, right? And so basically what we're looking at, what we're seeing is, and what Solomon is trying to say here is that pressing a person to be happy by singing songs of joy to them or telling them Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays, pressing that person to be happy, whether through song or through words, can be very cruel to them. Like taking off their coat when it's freezing outside. Or it can also be very explosive to them, like pouring vinegar on soda. It's not that the people don't want to be happy during the holidays. It is that there is so much going on in their hearts and their minds that it makes Christmas more of a time of darkness than a time of light. Real life isn't like Hallmark Channel movies where everything seems to be going maybe wrong for a while, but by Christmas, everything goes right. Right? It's not like, this is where if you saw on Facebook, I posted a Folgers commercial, right? Peter comes home for Christmas. He gets there just in time, early in the morning to make coffee for the entire family, and the entire family wakes up to the wonderful smell of this aroma of Folgers coffee. And they're surprised to see their oldest son has come home for Christmas, and everything is just right in the world, and that's not how Christmas is for a lot of people. Widows and widowers have lost their lifelong spouse. There are parents who have lost their children. There are children who have lost their parents. There are children who don't have their parents home for Christmas because they're deployed overseas to fight in a war far, far away. There are families who are homeless. There are families who are watching their loved ones fight cancer, some other disease, hoping maybe that they would get just one last Christmas. Some don't have it work out. Fathers and mothers are without jobs. They can't even afford the meagerest of Christmas presents for their children. Families are torn apart because of harsh words spoken years ago, or maybe just yesterday. dreading going home for the holidays because they know that by the time they get there, by the time Christmas is nearing an end, there will be arguments. Someone is going to be passed out drunk. Words are going to be said. Very well, lives could be ruined. If we were to stop and think, though, for a moment, we'd actually realize that these kinds of people are the people who can really understand Christmas the best. I mean, who better to understand the light coming into the world than those who are actually living in so much darkness? Who can hope and to see that light shining through, whether it is so far away or whether it's getting ever closer? Who can appreciate that more than those who are living in darkness? Today's first Sunday of Advent, like I said this morning, earlier, and it is the time where we remember what it is like to expectantly wait for the coming of the Messiah. Not knowing when he is going to come, because it is not just the first Advent, the first time that Christ came, the first coming of Christ at Christmas time. It's not just that Advent that we are observing. It is the second Advent, and we tend to not so much think about that second Advent at Christmas time, and we might say something about it, but really we are anticipating Christmas, not the second coming. But at the first Advent, when the first Advent actually happened, the people were in darkness and they were hoping and waiting, expectantly waiting for the Messiah to come. See, today we have a date, right? And we have a date with an expectation. December 25th is when Christmas is going to be. That is the end of the Advent season, the beginning of actually Christmas season, right? Because we have Advent season first, and then Christmas is between December 25th and January 6th, right? It's the 12 days of Christmas. That's technically the Christmas season. We know when Christmas is coming. They didn't. They didn't know when it would come at all. Their date was simply known as someday. Right? When you go back to Adam and Eve, and there we see the proto-evangelium, right? The first gospel mentioned. Someday. He'll come. Through the time of Abraham and Moses and David, it was always someday. But here's the thing, someday never came. It never came. They just kept waiting for thousands of years. They're waiting for someday to come, and it's not come. Right? I mean, Solomon ultimately is going to take the throne, and after Solomon, Rehoboam is going to come, and he is going to split that kingdom in two. And Matt was talking about this. We're going to get into a little bit more, but he was talking about this during Sunday school. And Rehoboam comes and he splits the kingdom from north into south, and and he does it because he is just a hubris man. He is a very prideful, arrogant man, thinking that he can do whatever he wants to do, and the people are just going to deal with it. And they don't. So you have your 10 northern tribes, and then you have your 2 southern tribes known as Judah. Ultimately, they just take on the name of Judah, and the southern tribes take on the name of their capital, ultimately, to be Samaria. And Jeroboam, who became the king, the first king of the 10 northern tribes, immediately leads them into idolatry. That is one of his first acts, is to have 2 golden calves commissioned to be made, a temple to be built where the people can come and to worship. And ever since that point, the northern tribes were falling further and further into disarray. King after king comes upon Israel, upon the northern tribes, Samaria, and they just lead them further and further away from God. It was to these people that Isaiah wrote the 9th chapter of his book. This morning, we're only going to look at the first 2 verses of this chapter. Just the first 2 verses. The first thing that I want us to hopefully see here is the reality of the people. That there is darkness upon the people. And as we get a little bit more into the history, we'll understand why that gloom, why there is such a great darkness. But then I want us to ultimately go to the second reality, that there is going to be glory among these people. There's glory promised to them in the midst of their gloom. But then finally, I want us to ultimately take this and tie it in because there is a gospel message here. So there's the gloom and the glory and the gospel. So if you will, please stand for the honor of the reading of God's Word. Just going to read the first 2 verses of Isaiah chapter 9. But there will be no gloom for who was in anguish. In the former time he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the latter time he has made glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, on them has light shined. Let's pray. Father God, we thank you so much for this morning that you have given to us. We thank you so much for all that you are doing, even when we do not understand it, because we know that all that you do is absolutely right. And we are thankful that you are in control, even in those moments where it seems like chaos has taken the wheel. Father, I pray for those this morning who might be suffering in darkness, whether it is the darkness of the spirit, the soul, because they do not know your Son. They have this veil that is still over their spirit's eyes, but they cannot see the glory of Christ. Or whether it is this darkness of mind, they are seeking wisdom. They're seeking knowledge. They're seeking to know exactly where they are supposed to go, and they're praying, and they're praying, and they're praying, and there is nothing, and they don't know what to do. Or for those whose darkness is emotional darkness, they are experiencing a deep, dark hole emotionally. Depression, missing of a loved one, hurting because of harsh words, because of bitterness. I pray for them all. I pray that they would be listening and their hearts would be attentive, and that not my words but your words would penetrate. They who lived in darkness will see a great light. God, I pray for the Reesers as they are on furlough at the moment, but they are going to be going back to Spain to minister. I pray for them as they seek to build up, to mentor, to help the new elders there, especially the one who has become pastor. I pray that they would have opportunities to share the gospel with those around, and that those who are in Spain under such deep darkness would also see such a great light. Pray for Macedonia Baptist, as they are going through some hard times, some very difficult times. They are looking for a pastor. I pray for the interim as he leads and as he guides, that he would speak your truth, but do so with love, that he would guide them along the right path, that you would send them a pastor who can help heal their Father, as we open up again, may our hearts be moved, may our minds increase, our knowledge increase. More about you, not in and of itself, but that we may love you evermore. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So approximately 13 years before Isaiah began his ministry, Israel was going through an unbelievably bad time. Northern tribes. So when I say Israel, I'm talking about the northern tribes, Samaria, right? So they go by different names. Ultimately, it becomes Samaria. When I talk about Israel, I'm talking about the 10 northern tribes. Judah, if I start talking about Judah, I'm talking about the 2 southern tribes. Just to kind of let you guys know that, all right? Make sure there's a distinction. Israel is going through some really bad time. Israel's king Zechariah had only been king for less than 2 years before he was assassinated. And the guy that assassinated him ultimately is going to come and take the throne, Shalom, and he precedes him on the throne, but he only lasted about a year or less before he is assassinated. And when he is assassinated, another king takes the throne who was part of that assassination, Menahem, and he becomes king, and he's relatively a strong king. He actually lasts for 10 years during this time. But he's not stronger than the Assyrians. The Assyrians are getting much more powerful than they used to be. They kind of did this kind of thing, a roller coaster of power. They would gain power, then they would absolutely lose it. They would gain power, and they absolutely lose it. But now they're gaining power again, and it's coming to the point where this is what we would call the Second Assyrian Empire, where they have really finally gotten their stuff together, and they are actually gaining on those that are around them. They're defeating Babylon. They're going to hit Egypt, and they're going to ultimately take Israel, and they're going to try to take Judah, which they do all but Jerusalem. But at this point in time, they're just beginning to gain that power, and so Menahem then ultimately is going to have to pay off the Assyrians in order to keep them out of Israel so that they can actually survive as Israelites, their own country. Then, 10 years into his rule, Menahem is also assassinated, and Pekahiah takes over. Pekahiah being part of that assassination. Pekahiah, ultimately, as he ascends the throne, he's a very weak king. He only lasts a couple of years. And then Pekah takes over. So it's at the beginning of Pekahiah that Isaiah starts to prophesy. Pekah is now in, and not the whole, classic clans, royal thing, right? Not those Pekahs, but King Pekah, right? Pekah is now, he is on the throne, and he is not a great king. Pekah and a group of his soldiers formed a coup, assassinated Pekahiah, and then ultimately he decides that they don't really want to pay that tribute anymore to the king of Assyria. And not only that, but they're going to join forces with Egypt. And they're going to try to get Judah to join forces with them as well, except the king of Judah says, I'm having no part of this. I'm not that dumb. And so what Pekah does, and the king of Egypt, they come together and they start to attack Judah, because Judah won't join forces with them, except while they are doing that, because they have stopped paying tribute to Assyria, then Tiglath-Pileser III starts to march into Israel in order just to take them over. And the 2 northern tribes, most northern tribes of Israel, right on the Assyrian border. In fact, they've been so close to the Assyrian border, pretty much almost forgotten about that they had already started to intermingle with the Assyrians and other Gentiles at that time. Was Naphtali. I always pronounced it my entire life Naphtali, and now it's Naphtali, is what I understand it's supposed to be. Naphtali and Zebulun. They're right on the border. And they're the very first ones that Tiglath-Pileser III comes after and defeats. And when he comes after them and defeats them, he takes them and he scatters them all over the Assyrian Empire. Go with me real quick. Keep your fingers in Isaiah, but go with me to 2 Kings 15:29. Sorry. I accidentally went to 1 Kings. 2 Kings 15:29. In the days of Pekah, king of Israel, Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, came and captured Aiyan, Abel-Beth-Makkah, Gimnoah, Kadesh, Hazor, Gilead, and Galilee, all the land of Naphtali, and he carried the people captive to Assyria. Death, slavery, loss of homes, loss of properties, family, life, hope, loss of all of that, right? That was all that they had, and they lost it. Tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun, like I said, were the northernmost tribes of Samaria, of Israel. They bordered that Assyria, and they had been taken captive now, and they've been exiled all over the place. When that happened, you can imagine the darkness that was felt. Not just in Naphtali and not just in Zebulun, but the entire northern kingdom. It was only a matter of time. In fact, if you go to chapter 17, you'll see, I think it's around chapter 5, that Shalmaneser will ultimately finish the job. Separation, humiliation, destruction, depression, death, and hopelessness was all theirs to own. Here you go. That's all that they really pretty much had left. And it would get worse. And so it's to these people that Isaiah is writing in chapter 9 to. These people who had watched their kindred, their friends, their business partners being killed, being dragged away, being maimed, being raped. That's who they were talking to. That's who Isaiah was talking to. And so we see in verse 1, but there will be no gloom. There is gloom at the very moment. There will be no gloom for her who was in anguish. In the former time he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. Isaiah was looking to the future, while at the same time describing the realities of the present. There will be no more gloom. Thus, at this very moment, there is gloom. There is deep, deep darkness in their land. In the former times, he has brought into the land of contempt, right? He's looking to the future. That's what he's kind of talking about the future. But in the former times, he has brought this land into contempt, which is what they are in at this very moment. They are contemptible at this very moment. But there will one day be a day where it's not true anymore. That's the future that's being spoken of. But at the present moment, Zebulun and Naphtali are going through just the worst of darknesses. The future promises are greater than the present realities. The glory is going to be greater than the gloom. Look with me. Let's finish it up. Let's look at all of chapter or verse 1 here. But there will be no gloom for her who was in anguish. In the former time, he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the latter time, he has made glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. Now, real quick, just so that we can understand what this is, the whole land of the sea, the way of the sea, and Galilee and all that stuff, that is pretty much that portion of Samaria, of Israel. That is that whole portion. It's between the Mediterranean Sea and ultimately the Euphrates River. But this part is where Zebulun, this part is where Naphtali, right? This is where Samaria was, where Judah was. This whole land is going to be glorious one day. That which is being taken over by the pagans, that which is just going to be abandoned ultimately because of being exiled, right? From any Jewish presence almost. That place is going to be glorious. That's the promise. And Isaiah is using what we would call prophetic perfect in these verses. He does this actually quite a bit in his book. It's called the prophetic perfect. And it simply means that he is equating what's going to happen into the future as if it has already happened. That's why it's such a weird reading, right? That the land that is still in contempt, well, it has been in contempt, but it is now received glory. It's called prophetic purpose. Prophetic perfect. In the latter time, speaking of the future, latter times. He has made glorious. And prophetic perfect, at least in this case, is all to do with God's eternality and our faith. This shows that God is eternal, but also shows what faith is really all about. And so here's the thing. Because God is eternal, he is as much in the future as he is in the past. God is not bound by space and time. And if you ever get a chance to read C.S. Lewis's explanation of God's eternality, absolutely take that opportunity to read it because it is mind-blowing. But what God sees and what is ultimately going to be in the future for us, God is already there. It is already a present reality with him. What has happened to us in the past, God is already there. It is still a present reality with him. It is just mind-blowing to think about this, but this is what we're looking at. God is prophesying through Isaiah, saying that this is going to happen in the future as if it has already happened in the past. He is all places and in all times. Places and times are for us. There is no past, present, or future for God. It just is. And so when Isaiah is speaking of the future, he is speaking of the future in God's reality. And when Isaiah speaks about the latter times that he has made, latter times meaning in the future that he has made, it's all done. So we're talking about God's eternality. But not just about God's eternality, but it speaks to our faith as well. Faith lives according to future promises as though they were present realities. Let me give you maybe a little demonstration of this, right? You get home this afternoon, and you decide you're going to check your email. So you open up your email. There in your inbox is an email from a Nigerian businessman. And as you click it open, you start to read this letter from a Nigerian businessman that ultimately that he wants to give you $1 million if you will just simply quickly help him out. All he needs is your Social Security number, your bank account number, the routing number, of course, and so forth and so on. And if you can just provide that little bit of information, he's going to wire millions of dollars into your account. And you're like, that's an awesome deal. And so, you hit reply, you provide all the information into it, and you send it off. That's what you do, right? Raise your hand if that's exactly what you would do. Why not? Are you believing that something nefarious is up? Something's not right with this, maybe? That this promise of sudden wealth isn't really a reality? Is that what you're thinking? It's not going to happen? There's no faith. And so you don't act. But the opposite would be true. If you did believe that he was going to wire you millions of dollars, if you absolutely, actually believed that, you would act upon it, wouldn't you? Because faith deals with future promises as if they're present realities. We act in the present expecting that promise. Isaiah spoke of a future promise as if it was a present reality. Because he believed that it was true. He wanted his readers, he wanted the people in Zebulun and Naphtali to believe, and not just them, but those in Israel to believe that the promise of the glory to come was a reality, and he wants you and me, the readers that are what, 2,700 years later, he wants us to believe that those promises are a reality. The glory would come to Zebulun and Naphtali. And here's the thing. Kind of like last week, we saw that there was a partial understanding, a partial fulfillment of the prophecy. There is a complete fulfillment of this prophecy already known. Because that glory came at Christmas. That first Christmas. And that glory lasted for 33 years. There in that land that it was promised. And after 33 years, that glory spread all over the world. It didn't just stay there. So Jesus, when we speak of Jesus, we generally say Jesus of what? Nazareth. Well, Jesus of Nazareth was born in Bethlehem, which was in Judah, right? But he grew up, the reason why we say Jesus of Nazareth is because he grew up in Nazareth. Do you know where Nazareth is located? It's right inside Zebulun. He grew up for 30 years in Zebulun. That's where he grew up. Did you know that his first miracle was in Cana? Turning the water into wine. Do you know where Cana is? It's in the land of the Gentiles, or the land of Galilee, which is exactly where we see this is happening, right? Galilee of the nations. Did you know that Jesus taught and healed a deaf and mute man in the region of Decapolis? Also known as the region beyond the Jordan. Did you know that most of Jesus' ministry was done in Galilee, the region of Zebulun and Naphtali? Almost all of it. Not all of it, but almost all of it. In Zebulun and Naphtali. That's the prophecy being fulfilled. The glory has come back. Now, did it come back in the way that they were expecting? Absolutely not. But it came back to the region just as it was prophesied. That's why we can read in verse 2, right? The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in the land of deep darkness, on them has light shined. This prophecy was written about 730 or so years before Christ was born. But Isaiah saw it. He believed it. He prophesied it. And it happened. Now we know that the Jews hated Samaritans, right? They absolutely hated. We talked about that in Sunday school this morning. If you missed Sunday school, it was really, really good. You should come to Sunday school if you haven't been to Sunday school. Right? Talked about that in Sunday school this morning, that they hated the Samaritans, the Samarians, right? So Samaria, the Samaritans. They hated them, but did you know that Galilee wasn't much better? They didn't really like Galileans either, because the Galileans were made up generally of those from Naphtali and Zebulun. That's generally what it is. Galilee actually means circuit. It means this like circle around the Sea of Galilee, which is more of a lake, right? And so Galilee is this area, and in that area mostly is Naphtali and Zebulun. And they didn't like them very much. They were tolerable of them, but the Judeans, those who lived in Judah, those who lived in Judea, they didn't like them much, but they tolerated them. Because they were the first ones, again, Assyria's right up there, and all these Gentile nations are right up there. These are the first ones that intermingled, even going all the way back to Solomon. When Solomon was king, even those people were already intermingling with those people that were to the north of the Gentiles. They were already intermarrying and such. And so they were kind of like not the good people to deal with, right? So they always held it against them. They were the first ones to be carried off. They were the first ones to be dispersed, which obviously looked like, to them, the judgment of God. They must have been the most wicked because they got carried off first. They didn't like them. But even though they carried this burden of darkness, not just the hatred of the Judeans and the hatred of the Samaritans, but all their past, all that had happened to them, all that they went through, they carried this darkness all the way, and yet the glory. In the midst of that darkness, the glory shined, the light shined. In the midst of all that gloom, glory burst forth. Jesus' ministry was originally in Nazareth. That's where he started his ministry, and he spent some of his time in ministry. Nazareth of Zebulun, but ultimately, after John the Baptist died, he moves his ministry to Capernaum. Capernaum is in Naphtali. Go with me real quick, Matthew chapter 4. Look at 12 through 16. Matthew 4, 12 through 16. Now, when he heard that John had been arrested, he withdrew into Galilee, and leaving Nazareth, he went and lived in Capernaum by the sea in the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali, so that what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. The land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, the way of the sea beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles, the people dwelling in darkness have seen a great light. For those dwelling in the region of the shadow of death, on them a light has dawned. The fulfillment has come. The advent of Christ, the advent that they were looking for, the light that they were hoping, right? That at one time they couldn't even see light at the end of the tunnel. They were in such darkness, the light has come. That phrase, deep darkness, in Isaiah, but then we see in Matthew 4, it says, shadow of death. The idea that is portrayed there is what we see in Matthew, the idea of shadow of death. It is the same exact wording that we see, yea, though I walk through the valley of the what? Shadow of death, exact same wording. And we're not talking about death. We always use this at funerals or when somebody's on their deathbed or something like that, right? And we read it. I have been instructed, do not go to the hospital and read this chapter, right? Psalm 23, because if somebody's just in the hospital, they're going to have surgery or something. I'll read this because it just brings to mind death. But when David wrote the psalm, when he talks about the valley of the shadow of death, he is not talking about death in and of itself. He is talking about feeling like death. He is talking about death being upon a living soul. It's the shadow of death, not death itself. It is, in fact, the gloom and the darkness that death carries with it. But it's upon the living. It's the heartache, it's the pain, it's the despair, it's the disappointment, it's the separation, all of which the people in Isaiah's day were feeling, and that there are many in our day, probably in this very room, that are feeling the same. For various reasons, and in various ways. But they feel that valley of shadow. forth in the midst of the gloom and in the midst of darkness, the hope of knowing that their pain is not all that there is. The hope that the darkness cannot overcome the light. That's what we see in John 1:5, right? The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. That's the hope of the gospel, that even those who are in spiritual darkness, those even who are in mental or physical or even emotional darkness, that ultimately there is a light that is going to shine forth. And that light may be forthcoming later, it may be coming even now. There might be a little dim, little flicker of a candle there at the end of the tunnel, but that light is coming. For those in Christ, we have the promise of glory that will overcome the gloom. Just as the promise was fulfilled in the lands of Zebulun and the lands of Naphtali, just as they were, it overcame them. And it was fulfilled in them, so it will fulfill in all. Of course, we know that its ultimate reality is going to be not the first advent, but at the second. Go with me real quick, Revelation 1. Verses 3 through 7. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. And he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things have passed away." Jump down to verse 23. And the city has no need of sun or moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives it light, and its lamp is the Lamb. By its light will the nations walk, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it, and its gates will never be shut by day, and there will be no night there. They will bring it into the glory and the honor of the nations, but nothing unclean will ever enter it, nor anyone who does what is detestable or false, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life. You want light? You want the ultimate light? The light that will never go out?